Because where two or three are gathered, you have the perfect place to conquer sin. Where you have two or three are gathered, you have a community. The third thing that everybody should know about community is that community can provide a healthy balance of the three primary New Testament church elements: formative, caring, and missional relationships. In Mark chapter 12, a teacher of the law came to Jesus and he said, "Hey, Jesus, what's the greatest command?" And we know the response Jesus gave. He said, "The greatest is this: you have to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And then Jesus said, "And then there's a second one that you need to know about too, and that's love your neighbor as yourself." Then Jesus said, these two kind of sum up all the law. So there's these two commandments: to love God and to love your neighbor. And these two commands kind of break it all down. Andy Stanley, who's the son of Charles Stanley and the pastor of North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the fastest growing churches in America, in his book, Creating Community, this is what he says about Jesus' two commands. He says, at North Point, we have divided loving our neighbor into two categories: those in the faith and those outside the faith. So we have defined spiritual maturity as continual progress in three vital relationships: a person's relationship with God, with other believers, and with unbelievers. So what do we want people to do? We say it this way: we want them to grow in their intimacy with God, community with insiders, and influence with outsiders. Now, I would suggest that Andy's on the right track, but John 13 gives us a third command. Mark 12 says, love God, love your neighbor. And in John 13, Jesus says, I have a new command: love one another. So I say you don't even have to break the love your neighbor command up. You have your three commands: love God, love your neighbor, love one another. Three vital relationships that should exist in every church. But the key is that we need to find balance. Without balance, those three relationships will get you in a place where you don't have true biblical community. Have you ever tried to sit on a two-legged stool? I mean, some people have enough balance to pull it off. I wouldn't. I'd end up getting hurt. But if you add that third leg to the stool, all of a sudden the stool becomes much steadier. And so these three commands help to provide the balance for a good, healthy biblical community. Mark Driscoll, who's a pastor in Seattle, kind of came up with a formula to help explain this balance. He says, if you take the two of the relationships and eliminate one, in any way, you're going to end up with an out-of-balance community. He says if you have too much love for God, which kind of sounds funny, too much love for God and too much love for your neighbor, but no love for each other, you end up with kind of a parachurch ministry, doing lots of good things for the world, but not really the church. And it says, if you have too much love for God and too much love for each other, but no love for your neighbor, you end up with fundamentalism. You all sit in a room and you love each other, but you never get out in the world. And he said, if you end up with too much love for each other and too much love for the neighbor, but not enough love for God, then you have liberalism, which has lost the gospel. So you've got to have a balance. You've got to love God, you've got to love your neighbor, and you've got to love each other. And true biblical community balances those three things. That's why here at Calvary, when we talk about life groups, we say life groups should be formative, caring, and missional. And what that means is formative. People are being formed to look like Jesus. That's their relationship with God. People are caring for who? For one another. That's that loving relationship for each other. And we're missional. That means we're doing things to demonstrate love for our neighbor. And true biblical community will help to provide that balance. Balance is one of the key elements of a successful Christian life. And community, real community, will help you to find the balance in your life between loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving one another. The fourth thing that everybody should know about community is that you'll get out of community whatever you put in. That's a pretty obvious statement. You'll get out of community whatever you put into it. Acts 2 tells us about the very first community, and the word that it uses to describe that community was that they were devoted to each other. You see, if you want to get out of community, really great spiritual growth, then you've got to put into it a lot of devotion. If you don't put anything in, you won't get anything out. Duh. Well, what keeps people? Why is it that people might not invest themselves in biblical community? Well, I was kind of knocking some ideas around this week, and I came up with really kind of 4, and there's probably more. I think one of the reasons that people don't engage in community is because of pride. They say to themselves, I don't need it. I'm doing well on my own. They take a very individually centric view of Christianity. It's just me and God, and that's all I need. Pride. And so they don't love their brothers because they're so busy loving themselves. One of the other reasons people don't engage in community is because of their priorities. I'm so busy in my life, what with my job and my family and my hobbies, and these are all good things to have, but I really can't prioritize my relationships with other Christians. What you end up with then is you have somebody who maybe comes to church once a week and doesn't really interact or engage with anybody else, and then they go home and they think they're good, but that's not true community. That's not loving your brother. And if your priorities are so messed up that you don't have the time to love your brother, you're not going to grow spiritually, because you can't remain in Jesus if you don't love your brother. Another reason is immaturity. Some people just don't know. I have no idea I'm supposed to be doing that. Well, that one's an easy fix. Okay, now you know. But people they're an immature Christian, and they don't realize they need to be spending time with other Christians. And once they figure that out, they'll be able to invest themselves in community. And the fourth one is selfishness. And I would say this is maybe the kind of person who thinks they're engaging in community, who has relationships with other believers, but in those relationships, other believers, it's all take and no give. They go to a small group, but all they do is take, and they don't give. They come to church on Sundays, but all they do is take, and they don't give. Whenever they have a need, they're quick to call. But whenever somebody else has a need, oh, not today, I can't help you. And so their selfishness keeps them from truly engaging in real community. Now here's a simple test for you. If you say to yourself, I don't feel like I'm growing spiritually, and we all feel that way at times, I would suggest that anytime you feel like you're not growing spiritually the way you should, one of the first questions you should ask should be, am I investing in the lives of others right now? Because if you are not taking the time and using the energy and your resources to love others, you are not going to grow spiritually. Because you can only get out of community what you put into it. The fifth thing that everybody should know about community is that every community should be different. No clone groups exist. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one. Every community should look different. There's no set standard for what biblical community looks like. It's not, like we said in number 1, it's not programmed. You can't do it. I want you to think about the relationships in your life right now. Now, some of you have been through Link Up and you've heard me talk about this, so if you want to just check out right now, you can. But think about the relationships in your life. We all have different relationships that are at different levels. And I'm going to suggest we each have 4 circles of relationships that we live our lives in. The first is our public relationships. These are the relationships that we have with people where we probably don't even know their name. They're people that we see regularly. We know them by face. We might know their name, but we really don't have a deep relationship with them. This might be someone, if you go to the same gas station all the time, like Wesco, you know who the person who rings you up every morning is, but you don't really know who they are. Maybe if you go to Starbucks, you know who they are. Maybe you even know their name. But just people like that. Now, we all have people here today like that, right? You look around and you see the same faces pretty much every Sunday, a lot of times sitting in the same seats, although sometimes moving seats and throwing everything off. But, you see them, you don't really know them, you just kind of, the typical interaction with someone in the public, one of your public relationships is, how you doing? You might offer them a hand, but it's more of just a knowing kind of glance. Hey, how you doing? Good, all right. And you move on because you don't really know them. And we all have tons of relationships like that. That's not a bad thing. It's just the truth. We all have a lot of relationships like that.